Welcome back to this afternoon's symposium on biocybersecurity. I'd like to now introduce our third and final session discussing what is the path forward for biocybersecurity. A reminder that the Q&A function is available for you to ask questions of our panelists. Our moderator for this session is Dr. Ken Reardon, Professor of Chemical and Biological Engineering and Associate Dean for Research with the Walter Scott Jr. College of Engineering at Colorado State University. It's my pleasure to turn the session over to Dr. Reardon to introduce our panelists as they provide their remarks.
Thank you, Meg, and welcome everyone to session 3 of our symposium. As you can tell from the title of the session, the objective here is to talk about what we should be doing next. How can we improve our resilience to these biocybersecurity threats? And I'll mention for my CSU colleagues that this comes in a very timely moment because the Office of the Vice President for Research has released a call for proposals for seed grants so we can create interdisciplinary teams to take on this very question. Today, we have an outstanding panel of experts to discuss these issues, the path forward. I'll introduce each of them first, and then we'll dive right into Q&A. Our first panelist is Nina Ali. Nina is the Executive Director of Biohacking Village, and she has expertise in medical devices and the healthcare ecosystem. And Nina also leads the BioISAC. Welcome, Nina. I'm very pleased also to welcome our next panelist. Advance the slide. My colleague, Indrajit Ray. Professor Ray is from the Department of Computer Science at Colorado State University, and he has broad expertise in computer security and privacy issues. Next. Our next panelist is Dr. Sterling Sawaya, who is the founder and CEO of GeneInfoSec, Inc. Sterling has expertise in approaches to improve genetic information security and laboratory cybersecurity. Next. And our fourth panelist is Dr. Owen Redwood, the Principal Security Researcher at Research Innovations, Inc. Owen has wide-ranging expertise in cybersecurity and cyber-physical systems, including the development of online open courseware in this topic. So if we can have the panelists' images up now, so we're all in our little big or slightly bigger boxes on the screen. Two more. Excellent. Okay, well, just to get right to the topic of the session, in the previous two sessions, we heard a lot about the challenges and the impacts of biocybersecurity risks. And so now we want to talk about what do we do about this? What research do we need? What policies and what changes in our practices? That's where we'll start. I'll actually top to bottom, left to right on my screen of the Hollywood squares here. Nina, would you begin?
I was waiting for that moment. So I have notes. So the biomedical, biomanufacturing, hospitals, whatever bio part we work in, it's 24-hour, 7 days a week facilities. That means that we constantly have to care for these things. So what can we do to start making those things better? Research. When we talk about devices, when we talk about the manufacturing plants, whatever that looks like, we talk about them in silos and we're not talking about them as systems. So when I look at how we are working, it's very akin to how our bodies function. The example I give is your stomach lining is very different from your musculature in your legs. They do two very different things, but they work in the same body. So we have to look at things the same way, where what are we doing in biomanufacturing and what are we doing in the hospital, because they do correlate. So that, and there's been a lot of comments about how the hacker community is, and the comments are constantly something along the lines of bad actors. I tend to think differently on that, probably because as vocationally, I call myself a hacker, not a security researcher. I am a security researcher for the things I do, but by nature, hacker is the thing. bringing more hackers and citizen scientists into the auspices of what we do as friends, and just bringing them in to do the research and the work, because we think about things in very different ways. The idea is that we are bad actors working on very bad things, where if we only thought about the good ways to protect things, we wouldn't necessarily be doing the right way to protect. I'm going to stop there and let other folks, but ideas are going to go.
Excellent. Thank you. Owen.
I think to echo what Wayne said, who makes it so much easier for me to go, it's the culture thing, and it's having the right conversations. And what Wayne and Idaho National Labs have done for the power grid and other sectors actually can absolutely be done here. In my past organization, we worked with a wide range of hospitals and technology vendors, working with the American Society for Healthcare Engineering, and basically translated what cyber consequence engineering and cyber informed engineering frameworks that they have put out and they have translated to the power grid for healthcare and for building new hospitals. The thing at the end of the day, when it comes to actual practice, when it comes to dealing with technology vendors, if cybersecurity is not in the contract, it's not going to get implemented. And so from an organizational perspective, the culture has to go all the way from the end users, all the way up to contracting and procurement and leadership. There has to be organizational buy-in. And how do we get that? There's two ways. We have to be training the next generation of all of these individuals, from management to the bioinformatics, to the computer scientists and developers, as well as issuing contracts that are requiring cybersecurity standards. And I think that will hit it from two fronts.
Okay, thanks. Sterling?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me here. I think there's a lot of things that we need to do. As Charles Fracchia said, this is a call to arms. I'll add a unique piece that has yet to be discussed related to human genetic data. And I think it's very important that we stop pretending or acting like human genetic data is anonymized simply because the name has been removed from the file. This leads us to being more open with data that's highly sensitive and that you don't get to change for the rest of your life. So if a threat arises 20 or 30 years from now, if your genetic data is out there, there's nothing that you can do to stop it. And we're really misinforming the public and mistreating our research participants by the claim that the data is anonymized because the name has been removed from the file. And I'll end it there.
Okay, and finally, for the first round here, Indrajit.
Yeah, so thanks for having me here. And I had been taking notes, since the very first session. So I'll start by a point that Charles made in the last session, as well as a point that Wayne made. So Charles wanted to have, that all components that are there in this ecosystems needs to be secured. We need to have assurance, we need to have guarantees. But the problem that we have is that, all these systems, at least most of them, use some kind of a software. Okay, and in the software domain, there is this, property that you can never completely assure software. It's what we call NP complete problem. I mean, it's not, so we have to live with vulnerabilities within software. We cannot avoid that one. Okay, so let me start from there and bring up the problem, the comment that Wayne made, which actually I really liked. So, and I completely agree with him that, cybersecurity or biocybersecurity, whatever we want to call it, it is all about mitigating risks. Okay, so that's the very first point. And how do we do that one? We can try to we can try to secure, we can try to develop components which are more secure. I mean, in our community, I'm coming from the cybersecurity community, there is this joke that the only way to have a complete security is to, completely lock down a system. I mean, even if we think that, a cyber, a bio database that I have created, I do not share it to the world, I just keep it on my computer, but still I can make mistakes. Okay, so I think we have to realize that whenever we are talking about biocybersecurity, there is this issue of a human being somewhere in the loop, and that's the weakest link. So with that view, we would like to see, drive efforts towards what we called zero trust security. Again, let me explain what I mean. So right now, the way we look at cybersecurity is mostly from somebody from some imaginary perimeter will be coming from there and compromise the things that we have to defend. But that's a wrong view. I mean, many of us realize that one, and there was a point made, which in the chat, what we call the insider threat. Insider threats can arise from many different things. It can arise because somebody is trying to maliciously attack you, or it can also arise because somebody has made a mistake. Okay, and that will happen, that will continue to happen. We have to live with that one. So what we would like to do is we want to have, we should not always rest on this notion that if we have been able to, somehow secure the perimeter, and we allow only entities to come inside the perimeter by in some way authenticate them, verify them, and then that's done. No, that's not the approach we should be. We should be continuously monitoring. We should be able to continuously assess the risk, and we have to be more proactive in our defenses. And I'm afraid that, a lot of technology and a lot of, science has gone into in developing technology which we are not utilizing fruitfully. So let me make one case. So, we use encryption technology to store data, to secure data in storage as well as in transit. But we do not use, but when we want to use that data, we decrypt that data and then use it. But there is technology that is available which will allow us to do computation on those kind of, those encrypted data. Why don't we use it? So we have to, this community has to, determine that, what are that. I think, I'll be very welcoming if the community, I do not have a bio background. So, but I need I need to hear from the bio community, what the challenges are. And then I'll be able to suggest that, this is a good way to do these things. And we should be ready to adopt this extensive body of, research that has already been done. I think there are a lot of opportunity of applying them. Another example I'll give, Ed in the first session talked about, protecting data in some manner. We would like to use, hardware security in a better manner. There has been work that is, we can, he talked about having your, the complete medical history in the smartphone. Okay, and as soon as you have that one, that's probably not secure. But we know technology that can actually port this medical history into what we call a smart card. That will be hardware assured storage. The problem with all of this approach is that there is a cost associated, and we cannot forget that one. So I think the bio community, I would like the bio community talk about, what are the risks they perceive, and how much they're willing to spend in some, under some currency, and then we can, try to, build better security. We can do that. And with that, I will stop.
Thank you. So Nina, yeah.
So one of the problems in healthcare and biomanufacturing, to some extent, is that everyone is resource poor. So funding is always required, it's always needed. So when we have the conversations about we need money to do the things, they don't have the money to do the things. And that's why ROI is super important for them as far as patient billing, and that they get the full reimbursement so that they can continue to put money into what they are working on. And then there was another comment, I think Wayne had said something about you were the master of the domain. I am a big proponent. I am a big pusher for workflows and threat models, because if you don't know what's going on, you can't control it anyway. Mm-hmm. So when I worked in the hospital, one physician had 29 different workflows, which leaves a lot of room for a lot of errors. And we got her down to, I believe it was 17 at that time. But it's taking into consideration what people are doing and how they're working, and the external influences, so that we can also help them better the security and also help their stance on it. As in, you can't just leave the computer open when you're going to see another patient. That's not how it works. And then my last point is for hardware things. I was having a conversation with some folks this morning, and hardware is also a proponent for the things, because while we do have SBOMs, the software bill of materials that tells you the ingredients list and what's gone rancid and what hasn't, hardware is just as important to what we work on, because most of the ARM chips in most of the devices that we use are not made in America. They're made in China. And I think maybe a month or two ago, China nationalized that factory. So now it's completely under the auspices of Chinese law and Chinese regulations. So when we're bringing those things over and using them in our systems, in our hardware, in our software, in our devices, we have to take those things into consideration of, do we test them before and clean them if we have to, or do we just put them in with the hope and prayer that they're just sending us clean stuff?
Nina, I totally appreciate the recognition of hardware issues, especially when the components are built overseas. I do believe that the nationalization of that RM facility was limited to RM chips that are to be used in China. I could be wrong, but it doesn't really require a nationalized facility for somebody to slip in something very small that could compromise an entire facility, however.
But if we're thinking about all the manufacturing of the things, where does most of it come from?
No, exactly. Yeah, I was just pointing out
I'm
that.
here with you, Sterling. I'm just.
But agreeing with you, and in fact, expanding on that it doesn't require nationalization of the facility for the chips coming from that facility to be compromised.
Absolutely, Sterling. You made a very good point that, it takes little to, compromise something that we we think that is very secure. It's really, really trivial to, and there are so many points in which we can introduce vulnerability. I mean, that's why I think at every point we need to have this risk assessment, threat models to be developed, that I think is extremely important.
And building on that, it's more than just one device. It's all the devices on the network, and it's also knowledge of which devices are handling sensitive data like human genomic sequencing.
Owen?
Add on to the discussion. You can take perfectly secure systems and compose a very, very overall insecure system. In healthcare environments, the end users end up disabling many security protections that you would rather have enabled 9 times out of 10, simply because they are slammed, they have to get the job done, and they are overworked and they are not trained on these things. So one thing the FDA did in their pre-market draft guidance is they're asking vendors to consider putting in ways to audit the security settings for these systems so that you have an ecosystem of healthcare devices within your hospital. How do you know it's actually secured? How do you know it's actually still running the way it was deployed? You don't right now. And so it goes beyond building things to be secure, building things to have more secure hardware and better hardware procurement choices. We have to have ways of also auditing and checking these systems as they're operating to make sure that that security baseline is maintained.
So that brings me to another point that was occurring to me as I listened to all of you and also to Wayne and Charles in the previous session talking about culture, is that, when you first think, at least when I first think about biocybersecurity, synthetic biology and DNA data and genetic, information and manufacturing operations, it sounds like it's very much of a technical situation, that it's about software and data and instrumentation, but culture means people, and like what all of you have just said in the last 2 minutes is the human aspect of it. And so it sounds like to really work on this problem, to increase that security, to create the culture, we need to be involving not only the CS people and the bioscientists, but also I think our social science colleagues who can help us understand how to change the culture, how to bring that awareness. Do you think I'm accurate in that?
To my knowledge, Ken, that is not. Okay, in fact, this is one of the big challenges that we in cybersecurity we face in general. That we do not have really a good understanding of where human beings make mistakes. What prompts human beings to make certain decisions. At least in the cybersecurity context, I didn't think we have a good understanding of that one.
Nina.
So the other part of this, I worked on a project for microfluidics, and I kept thinking about who am I designing this for? So generationally, there's a lot of different generations, and they're the way that they've acclimated to technology, right? So there's the the baby boomer, the greatest generation, I think they're called, the great generation, and then the baby boomers, and then Gen X, the millennials, Gen Z, and all the others in between. We are creating things for people that had zero knowledge of how technology worked at all. And now we are creating knowledge for like the 5-minute-year-old that came out that is handed an iPad. So in between all of those things, we've had the people that grow up like myself, that I was just on AOL chat rooms doing the things because that's what was available. And also now we have the other folks that understand, like, if there's no S, it might not be secure, or, you know, you have to look for these very particular things. So the social sciences, I think, are important in how we communicate. This is what security looks like. This is what privacy looks like. If you don't understand, it's so completely fine to ask the questions. Saying I don't understand is not a fault. It's an acknowledgement of I need help, and that's it.
So I think I'll turn next to something that that was touched on a little bit in one of the previous sessions, and that's this idea that we have, you know, if you look around in our networked world of devices and databases and so forth, I mean, there's some parts of that that are really, really old. And, you know, it's certainly in a cyber context. And then we're trying to do new things and make them all better. And if we kind of leave out the human part for a moment, and from a technical perspective, are we stuck with trying to just replace absolutely everything that's in a network or every database and make it up to modern standards? Or is there some way that we can more or less retrofit things? Owen has an idea.
Again, I'll echo what Wayne said. Figure out what you cannot live without, what you cannot operate without, and focus your efforts there. In general program management and cybersecurity management, we preach people, processes, and technology. You probably have to invest in all three pillars in order to sufficiently secure your critical assets. Then from there, you can begin putting out other fires. Those critical assets may not have something you can readily invest in replacing. They may be critical and unreplaceable. And so you may have to have band-aids to secure the environment until you have the resources, as Nina said, in a very resource scarce world, to actually solve the underlying vulnerabilities.
Thank you. Anyone else have a thought on that? Yeah.
I have many thoughts. I think it was again Wayne that said there's also micro sectors within healthcare. So it's not just that healthcare is working in its own isolation. And I think the pandemic has brought us to that realization that it's not just that I found an issue here and it's only siloed into healthcare. It can hurt all of the other sectors that belong to it. And healthcare is one of the only industries that takes from everyone because you have to, because of the environment. So when we think about how do we fix things, it's an entire of industry fix.
Thanks. So Alan Rudolph has posted some things in the chat and sent a question as well, and it pertains to this idea of improving, going forward, improving the way the access and even the collection of data from various sources in this bio realm, where we're particularly wanting to do better, I would say, in inclusiveness, in having more diverse data, as well as providing access in a more inclusive way. What would you have to say to that? Is that something that's ongoing? I suppose it's not controversial to say that it's a good thing, but how can we do that, or is it already happening?
Well, to my initial point about identifiability of data, as a scientist, I'm all for open data and sharing of data. But when there's sensitive information in data that's identifiable, we need to take that into account when we consider who we're sharing our data with and the security precautions that the people that we share the data with are undertaking. For example, A couple years back, the OIG had called out the NIH for simply having overseas partners from potentially adversarial nations saying that they are using security precautions without any actual security training or any proof that security is actually undergone. That's a very small example of what we're seeing with the sharing of human genetic data in science. And I think it's really doing long-term harm, because when this begins to be better understood, I think it's going to harm participation in research. And that's not what we want. We need to have secure systems to ensure that participants' data is protected.
So, I mean, we have, I guess, programs that validate and certify that a lot of things are up to standard, whether it's for electronics or food safety or whatever. And it seems that in some sense, the blueprints for what you're suggesting already exist, or the idea is out there. It needs to be streamlined for this particular case. I mean, sort of modified to suit this particular case. At some point, it means that somebody is the one who's actually looking at the procedures and doing it. Do you have a thought on what agency would be best suited to do that?
Well, I think it starts at the IRB. The IRB is really responsible for those decisions, whether it comes down to, large-scale nationwide regulation. You can look towards the FTC and the FDA potentially, but this is very new territory. So there's a lot of things that we're just beginning to accept, such as the identifiability of genetic data and the sensitivity of that genetic data. So it really is something where we need to have more conversations like these to find the right government organizations who will take the charge to make a difference.
So can I make a comment on this issue of privacy? Privacy is very important, but privacy is very individualistic. Like, I mean, until and unless the person knows that sharing his or her data is causing harm, privacy really does not come into picture. But definitely there is value to sharing data. So I think we should look beyond look at privacy just beyond being able to whether we can de-identify somebody or not. Because so I'm more in favor of maybe depending on the utility of the de-identification, have various shades of de-identification. Okay, I think that's the approach we should use when we look into what's the value of sharing data. I mean, data sharing definitely has some value. So I think this new view of privacy is very important. Privacy versus utility trade-off that I think we need to do. And regarding data, there is, I think, one of the challenges that, we will be facing, we are beginning to face, but we'll be facing this, increasingly is data is very valuable to drive any modern research. In science, you cannot do probably without having good quality data. But we need to, we are seeing really a big push towards using machine learning, AI techniques, big data analytics. But what we forget is that all the model that we develop and we use are only as good as the data that we use to train these models. And people talk about this data getting poisoned, models getting poisoned, and definitely we need to think about starting. We need to start to think how we can prevent. First of all, how we can get good quality data. That's definitely, that falls within the domain of, experts in the respective domain. But then once we have this good quality data, how can we, how can we continue to ensure that all the training that we do on that data is continuing to remain good? Okay. And as soon as that's why I said that, we always think about using encryption technology to store that data. Yes, so long as the encryption technology is not opened, we can have the guarantees that the data is still good, right? But as soon as we open it to do some computation on it, we expose it to vulnerability. We expose it we allow it to be getting corrupt. There is a good chance that it will get corrupted. So we need to also focus on how we can develop new technology to do those kind of computations without revealing the data itself. This is a really a very, very challenging problem, and but there are solutions. There are probably not efficient solutions. So I think as a community, and in my opinion, this is I stated it as a very general problem, right? But this, I think, the way we can make these techniques efficient is to leverage properties of the particular domain. And that's where I think biologists need to get involved very deeply.
Good. Yes. I think that's important too, as you said, that we need the voice of the biologists and the biomanufacturing community. It's a there needs to be partnerships, and that's what we're driving toward here. One of the things that I also am aware of, Nina touched on this a few minutes ago, is about when you're building devices, and that where the hardware of various kinds, we have to pay attention to that. As someone who makes biosensors and bioassays along the lines of what Nina has done, and Owen has some experience in this realm as well, I think, when you're a little group and your expertise is in making this little device, and you're trying to do it in a hurry, so that, especially if you're a startup, you're trying to get it out there. The idea, it's just not common practice to have somebody who's on your team thinking about this additional layer of this biocybersecurity. And in many cases, we're also not thinking about what Nina mentioned about what's in there, how is the user going to interact with it. That's something we're doing more these days, but the security part not. So, in that, it's another way of time as a resource limitation too. So how can we make it easier for people who have expertise in one thing to make it to be developing a device that also has this extra part? Is there can we go to the security or us kind of place to get it?
I think Nina has some answers on that.
I love that you know me so well. So my second master's is in translational medicine, and it was the creation of a separate device. And I remember getting a C in my class because my final presentation was about security in medical devices. And the professor at the time said, that is not a real thing. That is not one of your choices. That wasn't an option. And I am clearly an obtuse person. And she said that I could redo my presentation. And I said, no, because it is a real thing and you need to acknowledge it. And 2 years later, I got an apology email from her. I took the C. I was like, I'm fine with it. C is still passing, right? So I took the L on it. And 2 years later, she sent me an email and she said, can you come give a talk to my class about what cybersecurity is and how it relates to medical devices? And we're friends now, we're homies, it's great, I love her. But it's just that still that moment of medical is still having a hard time saying yes, that we need to not build security in later, we need to do it now. And one of the things that I did try to instill at the university was the groups are very different backgrounds, but they also need to have communications with different parts of the community. So they have a nursing school. I said they need to have those conversations with how medical works. And you need to put them in contact with the community of computer scientists so that they can help put all of the security before this thing goes to trial, before it sees the light of day at all.
It certainly fits in with what Wayne showed us about fixing, solving the problem earlier instead of trying to patch it later. Owen, did you have something you wanted to add as well?
Sure. Lots of comments. I'll voice a few. With the way medicine is advancing and the number of different technologies, novel technologies that are coming out in the future that don't have predecessors and will be completely new, the way they can be impacted and impact patients will be perhaps inconceivable. And so I think it would be very important to have any form of cybersecurity education in these fields occur as early as possible. So this gets ingrained into their thinking so that when they grow up, so to speak, with these devices, as they're evolving in the market, they're perhaps thinking these same questions. it's very hard to train someone who's very seasoned in their career on what can go wrong with hacking a medical device. It just seems surprising to them most of the times. The few sharp ones I've worked with really get it. Um, and there's very little you can do to the medical devices that are already in the field. Uh, it's it's not something that the technology is gonna. It's not gonna fix itself. It's not something it's at a point where you can't patch out all the vulnerabilities. You can't patch in the capabilities that you need. There just isn't the hardware, processing power and bandwidth in terms of resources on the platforms to support things like logging, things like any form of host-based intrusion detection, any form of really alerting in terms of things going wrong or acting anomalously. And so in turn, we have a really complex problem right now where just in a medical setting, most of the staff have no idea what it looks like for a biomedical device to get hacked. What does that world look like? There's been some really very fascinating clinical training simulations that have been run. Nina, you can help me recall the group doing it, that put doctors in mock simulations where the medical devices are acting awry, and it's because they're being hacked, but they don't tell them that to the very end. So things like that, I think, need to be ingrained more in education across multiple fields. You could translate that to a biology lab. The gas chromatography system is going crazy. The NMR machine, it's not working. What do you do?
Nina, it seemed like, did you want to follow?
The conference that Owen is talking about is CyberMed Summit.
Yes.
Christian Demeth and Jeff Tully.
Sterling?
No.
Okay. I think one of the things that just come out, what Owen mentioned, the words training and education several times there. It's come up I think in all of the other sessions. And so, I'm here at a university, and so are many in the audience. It's what we do, right? We are into a certain, a big chunk of the training and the education for students. And there's also, of course, the workforce development training for people who are already in the workforce who could get more. What should we all be doing? How do you envision, what would you suggest for training in this area of cybersecurity, whether it's for device, for, of something more at the systems level. This is a super interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary field. We tend to grow up in our silos of cyber and bio. Any ideas about what we should do to move forward and make sure that we have at least, some level of training, if not, developing outright expertise?
Capture the flags are great. I put the link to the biohacking village capture the flag in there.
I see it. That's great. Thank you. And we are starting on that. I'll mention more about that in a few minutes, but yes.
I second capture the flags. That's how I gain most of my skills.
So maybe I can address that question, because as a faculty, I think about it quite a lot. Okay, and I always think where in exactly a curriculum we can really talk about cyber, bio or manufacturing or any other thing. The way I see it, that cyber is very related to computer science. Okay, it has to do with a lot with computer science. So the main challenge is that we need people who are groomed not only in bio, but also some aspects of computer science that is needed, right? If we want to introduce anything about bio cybersecurity. So the challenge is that given the scope of an undergraduate curriculum, I'm not sure where that will exactly fit in, and we definitely need to do a lot more brainstorming to do that one. But it is we cannot avoid it. That's I think we need to start from there, that these types of things we cannot avoid, and start, I mean, should this be just a graduate level program, or, we should try to groom, students, young minds right from the undergraduate days? I do not have a good answer, but we need to do it.
So,
So
go ahead.
yeah, I just wanted to add a third, I guess, for Biohacking Village, and taking inspiration from that. It's really great to take younger people and students and just throw them into the mix and give them hands-on experience. And something that we did at Gene InfoSec was we sponsored a capstone project at the University of Colorado to take some students and have them go into various laboratory environments and examine the vulnerabilities. A publication that I'll share here in the chat. And just to respond to Gary Polakovic's question about what CSU could put together, I believe I've spoken with Alan and others at CSU about this idea, but we just love the idea of getting the students into those environments, getting those computer science students to have fun hacking the laboratory environment, just passively watching, seeing what's going on. That can help the labs that they investigate, and it really helps those students to become enabled so that they can collaborate with scientists and with doctors to help improve their systems when they graduate.
Can I latch on to Sterling's comment? So
Yes.
one of the other things that this country does not do well is start training children very young on computer languages and programming and things like that, where in other parts of the world, like their level 2 are starting to work on those things. So if we started, I know it's a university, but also implementing kids classes on the weekend, something like that, where they're brought in, they're starting to do the hands-on things. I think that would be an incredible way to leverage next gen brilliance, intelligence, and curiosity into the next stages of what medical healthcare hacking are going to look like.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is to just, I think it's part of the changing the culture thing, is where some of it is an awareness thing. And that's what I wanted to mention too, is that when we talk about education and training, it doesn't mean that we have to make everyone be an expert at it. There's so many people who don't even know that it's an issue. So some of the education is really at a fairly fundamental level. What are we even talking about, and why does it matter? And so that whether it's a device developer or somebody who's further in CS, they at least are in a position to understand that this is one more thing they need to think about as they do their work. And so I don't think that it needs, I think that's something, to Indrajit's point about a bachelor's level degree, it's already so full. We don't have to add an extra course or something. It's more something that we could just talk about in existing courses, not just in CS, but in other areas.
I completely agree with that. Faculty at universities can always reach out to high schools and their technology classes and present on these subjects. There is one thing that a CTF group, the Plaid Parliament Opponing, did, is that they created a CTF just for high schools. Why couldn't there be something similar in terms of, you don't have to be able to hack this or that, but be able to understand how things are attacked for various different sectors of technology, including the bio-cyber fields that we're talking about. I think starting the conversation as early as possible will do the most good in terms of changing the culture from the bottom up. On the other side of the coin, from top down, I think that all starts with the FDA, because they're the only ones that have the authority to actually mandate standards and requirements. Hospitals and individual organizations can band together and demand more from the vendors. But until that collectively starts happening, both the FDA and industry, the pressure from a marketplace perspective won't be there for the startups to hire the cyber person, for the big pharma companies to hire the cyber people, or to hire the people that are cross-trained. And so we need to create the demand, and we need to create the supply.
I think that's an excellent point. And so I'm going to turn now to some of the questions that have come up in the Q&A in the last few minutes. We have one from Joel Dawson, who says, I work in advanced manufacturing cybersecurity. One of my favorite additive layer manufacturing security papers implements a simulated sabotage attack on the 3D printers in a student lab activity. They did this to observe the student response, and the issue was that most of the students assumed that the attack was an equipment failure, which is exactly the point, Owen, that you made earlier. Only one team did the root cause analysis to actually find the attack. So Joel points out that this is a key problem in embedded system attacks, which it's this awareness thing again. It's something is that most users are not even aware of. So how can we improve quality control practice and incident response to allow for this deficiency?
That's a great question and great exercise that I wish was everywhere. That's something I've observed across every sector, power grid, healthcare, where the end users have no idea what a cyber attack looks like. So when it actually does occur, everyone's clueless, and it takes them hours, days, maybe weeks to realize what actually happened. That is, if they do discover what happened. The root cause analysis process is typically prone to false negatives with the way we train people. They just aren't aware of these fundamental issues. Now, from a quality control perspective, I would borrow from the threat modeling practice that's recommended by FDA, employ that in all devices that are being designed, figure out what are your inputs into the system, what can go wrong, and try to mitigate some of those impacts, some of those consequences. And that will have a profound value on the stability and security of your product. I will not lecture on the subject because I've done that many times. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? We have another question here from Molly Patterson. Back to the identity and privacy thing. So it looks like Sterling had to leave, but maybe the rest of us can think about this too. So thinking out loud, identity and privacy may not apply to genetic information with respect to non-health related genetic information. In biomanufacturing, is the sensitivity of genetic information, or does the sensitivity of genetic information lean more to structure function information on genes, or maybe the gene to phenotype information? Maybe a little specific.
Okay, a lot to unpack there.
Yes.
Oh, apologies, my video is off.
There you are.
So the one big question is, what do you know? How do you know a piece of genetic information is medically sensitive or not? So that's a challenge that we all have. If you would look at something like the often referred to as the CODIS database, CODIS STR database, of what people like the FBI use to identify suspects based on their DNA, there's a clear case to be made that that's not sensitive medical information. And so although it's identifying, it can be used to identify you, it's not highly sensitive. So there are different grades of sensitivity of our genetic data, but we're rapidly moving towards a full genome sequencing or a full exome. That's the protein coding section of your genome. And you don't know in advance where the variants lie before you sequence them, and you don't know the sensitivity of those sequences until potentially decades later. So also we have to consider that this goes beyond a privacy issue and could very much be a security issue, because as we see just today, we're getting a call to blacklist the Beijing Genome Institute. And the details on that are that the genetic data has the potential to be used in a bioweapon attack. So you might not recognize that particular receptor has a sensitive variant that can be used in some type of an attack, and you may never recognize it. You might not even know that the attack has occurred. So being proactive, protecting our data ahead of time is necessary. I hope that answers the majority of those questions there, but happy to expand if you'd like.
I think that was, I think that made a lot of sense. So I'm curious, do we have any more questions from the audience?
Can I comment about what Wally Patterson had said in the chat?
Yes, please.
So there was a question about who owns this or who runs the things that we work on, and it is beyond the FDA. So the American Hospital Association in 2017 put out 629 different regulations were in place for hospitals by 4 different government agencies. And that's just 4 years ago, almost 5. So we are working with a lot of restrictions and a lot of things that have to be formalized by us as humans to make decisions on what is going to work best and what isn't going to work best. And it's a lot of different thought patterns that have to happen there to ensure that you are doing the absolute best on the laws, rules, regulations, audit metrics, and standards that are put in place to protect patients. And it feels like a lot of that will get lost. So when we talk about, who's in charge of what we do, it does feel like we need one person to say, yes, this is how you're going to do it, or no, this is not how you're going to do it. And that's a challenge that I've put forth to some of the government agencies of how are you going to do this? How do you tell people what to do in a logical, straightforward, here is your path function?
So in other areas that are, kind of cross-agency, that there are these intergovernmental working groups. Does anybody know if that happens in this subject?
There are many working groups. Sorry, go.
On this specific subject of cybersecurity. I'm gonna guess that by the fact that if you don't know it, and I don't see anybody rushing to tell me in the chat that they know about this, I'm thinking that that's, there's so many agencies with an interest in, who's like domain, who's crosses into this, that they should, it seems like a fairly straightforward thing as a non-government person to say that they should get going on that, to talk to one another at least. And that's also part of the culture change that we've discussed several times today. So I would like to kind of head toward the end of this session by asking each of you what final comments you'd like to provide with us. Final as in final today, you're not cut off for life. But what would you like to kind of leave the audience with as some thoughts on this, about the top things we should be doing in the next year or two? I'll start with, go reverse order of what I did before. So I think that is Indrajit.
Well, my parting remarks will be that, this is a very important area. And but I think the bio and cyber community really need to work very closely together in a very tightly, well knit manner. And I think there is a need for each of these domains to really understand the other domain. And I have been working with Jean, for quite some time now, but still I will acknowledge, sadly, I do not fully understand the whole, the whole bio ecosystem. And I think that's the thing that we should, it should be the other way, both ways actually. So that I think there is really need to concerted effort for these two communities to come together. The stakes are enormous.
Yes, I agree. Sterling.
Yeah, I'll second that. A lot of times smart people, geneticists, molecular biologists, doctors, they are capable of sort of hacking a system together to make it work, but they don't have the expertise to actually keep the system secure. And because of that, we're dealing with a large amount of security debt is a term where you ignore security and then you just build up the need for it and the need for it. And fixing that at the end of the day is far more expensive than being proactive and taking charge. And for that, getting those cyber people to examine the devices and the systems to better understand where the vulnerabilities lie is absolutely critical.
Thank you. Owen.
Well, what everyone can do next year is go to DEF CON and go to the biohacking village where these conversations do occur. I guess my big call to arms is that if brave, and I really mean very brave, researchers and perhaps research institutes were to approach the vendors, the big biomedical device companies, the big biotech vendors, and start these conversations in the context of, if we come together as the bioeconomy, as the greater ecosystem, and create the best practice, as opposed to waiting for government to mandate it on us, it will be better for all of us. It is possible. It's very difficult, and it dives into program management documents, contracting documents, and establishing standards that can be legally ruled on and held to account. But it allows you for creating the framework for making this happen. I have some experience with this. I don't wish to do it again, so I pass the torch off to someone else.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'll pass it over to Nina, not necessarily for that job, but to tell us like your thoughts as we
I do
conclude.
not want to do Owen's job. Owen is super brilliant in his own way. So echoing some of what was already said, healthcare is a team sport, and we have to stop acting like this is a silo. The land borders we created don't necessarily work for healthcare because the devices and the devices and things that we create go across. So if someone else has it, we've already been owned anyway. Reach out to the hacker community. We have a lot of brain thoughts and we love to share them. It's just the acknowledgement of people listening and making sure that the information goes somewhere. That's what we really care about. And yeah, come to DEF CON, come to the biohacking village.
All right, on my calendar. So I just want to conclude this session then by giving my deep thanks to all four of you panelists and to the audience for their questions. This has been a great session. I've learned a lot and I very much appreciate your time in being with us today. I want to mention that this also brings us to the end of our symposium. The time has gone by quickly. I'm kind of overflowing with ideas and thoughts for what to do next on all of this. And I want to switch over and for a moment talk about what CSU is doing for our students in that education realm. You know, the idea of capture the flag events has been mentioned and emphasized by Owen, Sterling, and Nina. And so that is, it turns out, that's what we're doing with the help of the Biohacking Village and Mantle Technologies. So we have, earlier today, we had a kind of orientation meeting for undergraduate students to come understand what this is all about. And over the course of the remainder of the fall and the winter, we'll have more events put on by Biohacking Village and Mantle Technologies, all leading up to a weekend-long spring challenge, cyber challenge event, capture the flag, whatever you wish to call it, for our student groups. And these, we're really encouraging the student groups to be multidisciplinary in their composition. The challenges that they'll see will benefit and will almost be required to have that representation from students who are majoring in different subjects. And so we're really taking what we've heard from Nina and Owen and Sterling, taking all that to heart and really providing that experience for some of our students. And we'll be talking this up so that more and more of them do this, not just this year, but in future years, events of this. We have on our Office of Vice President for Research site, we have at research.colorado.edu, you can find everything that we're doing in this area of bio-cybersecurity. And so we hope that you'll visit us there and join us for some of our future events. And so finally, I want to thank all of our speakers in the entire symposium, all of the moderators, and I very much also finally want to thank the CSU faculty and staff members who made today's event possible. Dr. Megan Suter, Dr. Brienne Brownhagen, Gary Polakovit, Lauren Weller, Patty Nash, and our Laurie Student Center events team under the direction of Ashley Martin. So thank you all for your participation. I hope that the presentations and discussions have inspired new awareness and ideas in you. We look forward to working with many of you in the near future, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.